that I think are dominating public discourse right now.
Yes.
And one of those is the George building collapse. 19, in fact, it's 20 people now
Yes.
that have died. There are still 33 others unaccounted for. For your party, what are key questions to ask of either the developers or indeed the owner of that building which was being constructed?
I think that the manner in which the issue of the George buildings collapse must be looked into holistically. Of course, the developer must be held accountable fully, but also the regulatory authorities that are supposed to approve certain projects of that nature should be held accountable as well as to what was the approval process and what was the inspection process that was followed even by the George municipality.
Yeah.
As to just what got to happen. And everyone else must be held accountable. And also it must be a clarion call to all the local authorities and regulators that they must pay detailed attention to mega infrastructure or building projects such that we avoid accidents of that nature, because to just lose 20 lives that easily should never be an easy thing to happen in South Africa. It must be something that must be avoided at all costs.
Yeah.
So the authorities must also be looked into as to what was the approval process, and was there any inspection, was the verification of the building plans, and all the architectural and engineering dynamics that got to decide and inform how the building should be constructed. I think that is one of the issues that has to be looked into. And of course, as the EFF, we send our deepest condolences to those that got to lose their lives in an otherwise avoidable situation in terms of what got to happen.
I was reading your statement on this very matter.
Yes.
And it talks about cheap labor, and you actually even put a figure on it that people were allegedly being paid 80 rands an hour, which is some form of exploitation. What do you make of that? And in particular, reading the newspaper today, I was reading that there is even a call for people who can speak certain languages that are spoken in Malawi, Mozambique, and Shona in Zimbabwe. And that tells you about possibly the large number of foreign nationals who would have been employed in that project.
Yeah, look, one of the things which, by the way, we have raised in the EFF, even if you look into the founding manifesto of the EFF, which was adopted in 2013, we highlight the fact that we need to have legislative framework that protects everyone else who is in South Africa, whether they are here lawfully or unlawfully, because the capitalists, and mostly in the construction sector, they take advantage of the immigrants and then they employ them for almost nothing. It actually started in the farms, mostly in the areas which border South Africa to the neighboring countries, where they employ people for harvesting season, and when they're about to pay them, then they call police on them. And that is one of the situations that we deal with, that we cannot treat immigrants in a subhuman way. That is what we actually always resonate, and most people get to misunderstand the position of the EFF, that we are for protection of human lives and humanity in its entirety, because to treat people in a negative and bad way because they do not have the immediate legislated rights is just immoral. It's totally unacceptable, and was one of the issues. And if you look into our immigration policies, we always emphasize the centrality that let's protect all human lives, even give access to healthcare and basic needs that are needed at all costs. And must even have protection of the labor rights as well. But also there has to be constant inspection as to who gets employed into these sectors that can expose people's lives to danger or to altogether perish in terms of what gets to happen. So it's one of the issues that we have historically raised, that if you do not protect immigrants, the capitalists will continue to super exploit them on the verge that a government or whoever is authority will just leave them to super exploitation without any consequences, because they do not have certain papers at that particular moment. It's one of the issues that we have dealt with substantially before.
Yeah. It is a sensitive time, Mr. Shivambu.
Yes.
And that, I think we can all agree, that perhaps getting into the politics of what has happened in George may not be necessarily a good thing to do. However, we can't overlook statements that have been made by the leader of your party in the past, now that we're talking about migrants in South Africa.
Yes.
That they ought to find, quote unquote, creative ways to get into South Africa, because if it were for the EFF, there would be a doing away with these superficial borders. So how do you marry that, what you're saying is the super exploitation of migrants versus those kinds of statements?
No, the EFF, by the way, has never advocated for illegal immigration into South Africa. We are of the view that everyone else must be documented, but by the fact that there are people who are here, we cannot then mistreat them because they've come in illegally. And the context of what the President and Commander-in-Chief said was during the COVID lockdown period, where there was a total shutdown for everyone else who had to come back, even those who needed to come back for their employment, whether they are legal or illegal and everything else there. And then government, during that period of the COVID lockdowns, had said that we're not going to allow anyone in or out and everything else there. And then there was then the call that, but these people, they need their jobs for basic livelihoods and sustainability. And then they said that these people must be allowed to come back to do their work in different as the EFF. What we say categorically clear, and we're not even fearful of any contradiction in that regard, is that we cannot mistreat immigrants in our country, particularly from the African continent, because it looks like the pattern is to just mistreat and to altogether look in a different way on mostly African immigrants into South Africa, because there's so many people from different parts of the world in South Africa, but it's only African immigrants who are exposed to xenophobic, hateful, Afrophobic nonsense that we can never associate with as the EFF.
Yeah. I'd like to move on from that subject then.
Yes.
And we're going to move closer to one of your key priorities of the manifesto of the EFF. But before we get there, you made comments recently that you're noticing that people are slowly converting towards the EFF. In other words, you're finding more and more support for the EFF as you campaign on the ground. In fact, you've gone as far as saying, post these elections, you may actually become number one or the second largest party. I want to understand whether indeed those were your comments.
Yes, of course. Look, the EFF, like let me tell you something which is a reality and which you can prove in less than 20 days, is that if the EFF doesn't get an outright majority in these elections, we're going to be the second best political party in terms of the electoral support in South Africa. So we have experienced the necessary quantitative growth, and of course accompanied by qualitative growth as an organization. So, and we know this.
Mr. Shivambu. Yes. I'm sorry. I don't like the sound of my own voice, but I need to get clarity.
Yes.
In these elections,
yes,
if you are not the largest party, in other words, the ANC is that party right now.
Yes.
If you are not in that spot of number one,
yes,
you're possibly going to occupy that which is occupied by the DA right now. You'll be the second largest political party.
That is exactly what is going to happen. And we must just look into the journey of how we got there. Remember, in our first participation in election, in 2014, we were bigger than the Democratic Alliance in two provinces of Northwest and Limpopo. And then in 2019, we then got to be bigger than the Democratic Alliance in Mpumalanga as well, then making it the three provinces. And we can tell you now, without any fear of contradiction, that the EFF will be decidedly bigger than the Democratic Alliance in Gauteng province, in KwaZulu-Natal, in the Eastern Cape, Of course, in the other remaining provinces, that they might still get some numerical majority, but not a decisive majority in the Western Cape. But in majority of provinces, we're definitely going to overtake the Democratic Alliance, because we know what we have on the ground now and what we did not have in both 2019 and 2014. So now we've got proper solid structures in all the 23,000 voting districts of South Africa were properly represented. And we know that for you to secure an electoral majority, you need to be present in all corners of South Africa. And the EFF is properly and ably represented in all corners of South Africa. So one thing which you must know is that the EFF will either be number 1 or number 2 in South Africa. That is a reality which you are looking forward to.
So I just want to remind you then, it's not the 2014 election I'm going to use, nor is it the 2019.
Yes.
Those were general elections, which is what we are going to now.
Yes.
2021, local
Yes.
elections. I don't know if you still remember how the EFF said at that time that it was and would take over some of the municipalities in South Africa. And this would not be through a coalition. This was going to be an outright win. That did not happen. So I'm wondering,
So I
sitting
think,
here,
yeah,
how realistic your predictions are this time around versus what we heard and saw subsequently post the 2021 election.
So you see, the other measure to gauge the EFF's success in 2021, one is the fact that in 2016, when we participated in our first local government elections, we had 750 councillors across South Africa. We now have got 1,200 councillors and represented in 95% of municipalities. You cannot finish both hands counting the municipalities which were not represented in South Africa of all the 257 municipalities in South Africa. You can count 2 in KwaZulu-Natal and 2 in the Eastern Cape and about 6 or 7 in the Western Cape. But in the rest of the municipalities, the EFF is firmly represented to demonstrate that we are solidly the only organization of the 3 national organizations which are represented in all provinces that has been showing consistent and dependable systemic growth. And that growth is not being arrested. And by the way, remember that we are still building the organization to have depth and proper representation in all the voting districts. And it's one of the issues that we must have to commend the ground forces of the economic freedom fighters on, that in less than 10 years we have got to achieve a national status, because it's only 3 political organizations in South Africa that are represented in all the provinces and are represented in even more than 80% of municipalities. So the EFF is, of course, a force to be reckoned with, and will demonstrate that much more firmly on the 29th of May, when a substantial majority of our people vote for the economic freedom fighters.
Yeah, we're fast running out of time. I've got so much to ask you, but I need to put this question to you, because you are the second in command in the EFF, and your deployment is in the Eastern Cape province.
Yes, currently, yeah.
Indeed. Is that where you are predicting this large growth that people are going to see come May 29th? Is that part and parcel of where your growth is going to come from?
No, look, we're going to have proportionally well represented growth in all the provinces. But I don't see any province of the EFF declining in terms of the number of votes that were received in 2019. If anything, I don't see any province in terms of the work that we've recorded thus far, which will grow by less than 100% as compared to 2019. I don't see any of the provinces that, because if you can just observe, remember we organize ourselves at VD level. So if you can have an organization that has got volunteers in all the 23,000 voting districts of South Africa, then you must know that that is an organization that is serious about electoral work and elections work.
Yeah.
Not even the current official opposition is represented in all the VDs. And we know this because when we then check the audits of the IEC in the voter registration weekends that occurred in November last year, and February this year. It was only the EFF and to some extent the ANC, because in a lot of VDs the ANC was not represented in KwaZulu-Natal. But the EFF has demonstrated that it is the only organization that is serious about electoral work and has spread its wings and clutch into all parts of South Africa. And that will be demonstrated when millions of our people come to vote for the Economic Freedom Fighters again on the 29th of May.
I can't not talk about KZN.
Yes.
It is one of the key battlegrounds, and you were initially deployed to that province.
Yes.
Before your subsequent move to the Eastern Cape. The introduction of the MK Party. Are you finding that it is making the EFF lose steam in KZN, or is the picture still the same according to the EFF? You're still finding enthusiasm around the EFF?
Look, do you know, I can tell you this without, do you know, by the time MK Party was announced publicly, the EFF had already put in place the voting district elections task forces in all the 4,971 VDs of KwaZulu-Natal, where you have got volunteers, 20 volunteers in each and every VD. And even after the formation of MK, even when we went to the rally on the 10th of February this year, there was never a shift of the constitution and the constituencies that we got to mobilize as volunteers of the EFF. So in terms of the ground forces of the EFF, there's never been a shift. We have never lost any member of the EFF to MK Party. On the contrary, the ruling party is the one which has had a lot of its regional and sub-regional leaders who flocked into the MK Party for one reason or another. But the EFF has never been affected by the formation of MK Party. And of course, it will get some support in KwaZulu-Natal and all of this. We cannot deny that fact. But it doesn't affect the consistent growth of the Economic Freedom Fighters. Remember that in 2019, we got 350,000 votes in KwaZulu-Natal, and we are sure that if we have underachieved, it would have been when we have failed to increase that by at least a minimum of 100% as compared to 2019. So we're not affected at all by MK Party, and I don't think it will displace us. And the other simple issue, by the way, which is scientifically proven, is that we appeal to a different constituency. We appeal to mostly younger voters, like all the statistical and polling illustrations have demonstrated the simple fact that a majority of young people, they say that this is our organization as a generation, which is going to carry us into the future. So I don't see young people associating with organizations that are led by 80-year-olds, or organizations which are putting people who are above the age of 80 to campaign for them, telling lies and all of those other things there, as is happening now with the dying liberation movement, former liberation movement, the ANC, where they put octogenarians to be the ones who are campaigning for them and say, no, vote for us because we represent the future. We're going to continue with the uselessness that has defined the past 8 years. So it's one of those things that, and young people are not fools, by the way. Young people are much more alert. The youth is far much more alert that they can't be misled by these old people who have been lying to them for many years, and they want to try to stratify the failures of the ANC in the past 30 years and say, no, it was not us, it was Zuma and everything else. It's one of those things that we have to then deal with differently. So the EFF is not at all frightened by organizations which do not represent the future. By the way, all these parties and their leaders don't represent the future in terms of the ideas, in terms of vision. Even biologically, they don't represent any future, because majority of these people who are making commitments to young people now will not be there in the next 20 years.
Part of the
ourselves will still be at the center of the agenda of economic emancipation here in South Africa and in the entire African continent.
Part of the reason I'm amused is that you're the same people who will say in Parliament, don't be ageist here. We're all equals. Now you're not afraid to use age as a factor. But
but I think look, the reality is that the issue is that when all of us were adults now, but I think globally there's an acceptance that there's a certain age category that must at least rest from working or participating in society. That is why there's retirement ages all over the world, which is 65 years old. I've never seen a 70-year-old retirement age. But you have got 70-year-olds and 80-year-olds who are saying that they want to lead the country. And leading a country is not an easy task, by the way. It's a very complex phenomenon that requires focus and attention to details as to just what must happen in all spheres of society, and also even a proper appreciation of the changing dynamics of the global economy. I don't think that any of these people who are raising their hand to want to lead South Africa, they possess that dynamism to could lead South Africa into the future, into prosperity. So we have to conscientize all young people that these people are just trying to defend their failed legacies. Like Thabo Mbeki has been going up and down and everything else. And even if you listen to his messages, he says, no, the 30 years are broken into two. It was a Zuma time and my time, everything else was perfect, which is not true. It's absolute. It's absolute nonsense, which has been happening. Yeah,
I can't. Otherwise, we're going to be derailed.
Yeah.
Personalities, but you, I'm told, you are very interested in the content of the manifesto of the EFF. So, I want us to listen for a moment to perspectives on the ground. We've gone around asking people's opinions about what they think of the EFF. Would they vote for the EFF? What do they think the EFF government would represent if indeed it is ultimately elected? So let's take a listen to what some people had to say.
Oh, thank you.
I think more than anything, it's young people not being able to trust anyone at this point. We don't know exactly who to vote for. We don't know exactly who to even vouch for, because these people have been promising things that are not even happening.
Nah, I don't believe it. Because politicians have a tendency of telling us things, right? They won't even do them.